Hey guys, Spire here. In this video I will show you how to convert red sand into normal sand, repair your anvils, and also how to break bedrock from above. But before we do that, let's quickly cover some information that you need to know in order to understand why we are able to do said things. First, you need to know that there are two types of actively loaded chunks. On the one hand, we have the so-called entity processing chunk that we are mostly familiar with. As the name already implies, entities that are inside those chunks do get processed. For instance, mobs walk around, items can despawn, falling sand can be created, and pretty much everything else related to entities. On the other hand, we have the so-called lazy chunks. They represent the border of the actively loaded world and the unloaded area. In those chunks, entities stop being processed, meaning that mobs don't walk around, items can't despawn, and falling sand will not be created. To answer the question when does a chunk become an entity processing chunk and when a lazy chunk, we just have to imagine a 5x5 grid of loaded chunks. Everything else around those chunks is unloaded. As a result of the 5x5 square, the center chunk will become an entity processing chunk. The other 24 chunks will stay lazily loaded. So this means as soon as a chunk is surrounded by a 5x5 grid of loaded chunks, it becomes an entity processing chunk. Now that we know that, let's take a look at the behavior of gravity-affected blocks in both types of chunks. In entity processing chunks, a gravity-affected block will start falling as soon as it finds an air block right below it. When starting to fall, it will remove the block and create a falling sand entity that contains the information of the original block. It continues to drop until it finds a block that is not air, and if it does that, it either creates the block again or it drops as an item. However, that's nothing new, so let's see what happens if a block starts falling in a lazy chunk. Since creating an entity wouldn't make much sense in those chunks, the block instead checks the blocks right below it for something that's not air. If it does find a block, it will remove itself and place itself right above that spot that it just found. That's the theory, at least. In practice, it doesn't entirely work that way, so let's take a look at the two different sand blocks when falling in lazy chunks. As we can see, the normal sand behaved exactly like we assumed. However, the red sand turned into normal sand for some reason. The answer to that is that when the red sand finds a block to land on, it will remove itself and place the default type of itself, which is, as you can probably guess, normal sand. So if this works with sand, let's try out some other gravity-affected blocks with multiple states, for instance, anvils. If an anvil should fall in lazy chunks, it will do the exact same thing as sand. It goes down in a loop and searches for a block to land on. If it succeeds, it will remove itself and place another anvil on top of the block that it just found. However, the same will happen as with the red sand. The new anvil that gets placed is basically the default anvil, facing in one specific direction and you guessed it, fully repaired. Now that we tested the gravity-affected blocks with multiple states, let's see what will happen to the ones with only one state, for example gravel. Since gravel is already the default block, it will do the exact same thing as normal sand. It just removes itself and places a block right above the spot that it found. Alright, now we covered every block that is able to fall, right? No, wait, we missed one. The most unique item in the game is actually able to fall, so let's take a look at the magic powers of the Ender Egg. We would expect it to fall just like gravel, so that it removes itself in lazy chunks and places a new one above the spot that it found. So let's see if that's the case or not. Well, it landed, but it actually removed the block instead of landing on top of it. The reason for that is that the Ender Egg actually takes the position of the block that it lands on to create the new Ender Egg, instead of the position +1 in the Y coordinate. Meaning that we are able to remove every single block in Minecraft using the rarest item in the game, which I find quite funny and fitting. To use this knowledge now in survival, we just have to combine the knowledge about loaded chunks and the gravity-affected blocks. The area that is being loaded by the player, depending on the render distance and view distance of the server, contains a 2-wide grid of lazy chunks. To mark this, I used a command by Panda4994 that fills the chunks with clay and also uses a different color set for the lazy chunks. So if I would stand in the chunk made out of gold blocks, I would load all those chunks with a render distance of 16, and the last 2 rows of those chunks would be lazily loaded, as you can see. To use this now, we just build a redstone line using piston repeaters starting from the center chunk to the border, and at the end we will have an extended piston with the gravity affected block above. If the piston retracts, the block will start falling in the lazy chunk. If you are unsure about how far you need to go with the piston wire, just make it longer, as long as possible. The piston will load the chunk they are in and therefore extend the length of the lazy chunks. However, make sure that the chunk at the end where your gravity affected blocks are in is a lazily loaded chunk, otherwise they will just fall normally and you will see what will happen, pretty much nothing. But that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and thank you for watching.